My name is Michael Collings. I'm an emeritus professor of literature and creative writing from Pepperdine University. I taught there almost 30 years, retired 10 years ago when I could no longer hear my students. For some reason the administration felt that that was important and decided we had a long discussion and we amicably parted. And I've not missed a moment of it other than being with students. I attended my first LTUE in 1983 and have missed maybe 2 or 3 in the interim. 1. I know 2. Anyway, I've been here about 30 years and have enjoyed it. It's one of the finest symposia of its sort, and it's the one that I first recommend people to. It's also going to be my last LTUE. So what I did was suggest a panel that will be mostly question and answer. If you have no questions, I will talk. And that should stimulate questions, just out of sheer necessity. I have done almost everything in writing. I've taught it, both expository prose and creative writing. I've taught short story, novel, poetry. I've written screenplays, none produced, nor do I intend them to be, but I've written them. I've written books of criticism, academic and scholarly, collections of short stories, about 1,000 reviews, something over 2,000 poems, 10 novels, and a partridge in a pear tree if I'm feeling particularly Christmassy. And so I spent the last several years as an editor for a small press, so I have on-hand editorial experience, and have a website called Collings Notes, where I post reviews and articles about writing and my poems and anything else I feel like I want to write about, because there's nobody to tell me I can't do it. You get to a certain age and life gets easier at the same time as it gets harder. So what I thought I would like to try is talk about beginnings, middles, and ends. That is, and this is going to sound arrogant, but it's only because I am arrogant, anything to do with writing that you've ever wanted to ask a professional writer but haven't had a chance to ask. If I know the answer, I will share with you. If I don't know the answer, being a retired professor, I will make one up. And it will sound so convincing until you go out and actually try. Actually, I'll make the effort to at least keep within the bounds of reality at certain levels. I am here with my son, Michael Brent Collings, who was one of the leading horror writers on Amazon.com, one of the leading writers, independent publishers in the world. So if you wish to ask me any questions after the conference or after the panel, I'll be at his table in the dealer's room this afternoon and tomorrow. I have 2 books there, and curiously enough, they fit what I was going to talk about. Several months ago, I published a novella, 37,000 words, called Space Operae. Any of you who know Latin know that this is bad Latin. Except it's not, because this story takes place in another universe where there are absolutely no humans whatsoever. Every character is an alien. All of the characters are in some way not fun. And as the story goes along, one group of characters destroys the first group and is destroyed by the second group. And often the distance at the core of the galaxy is a Lovecraftian old one waiting to destroy everything. And I had more fun with this than I thought would be possible. I published it through Create Space and felt like, that's a good book. And I got a couple of comments from early readers several of whom said there's no human in it. There's nobody to root for, because they're all pretty nasty characters. And if they aren't overtly warlike, they're covertly carrying on with the great old ones, which is not a good thing. Anybody who's read Lovecraft knows that. So I thought, I wish there was a way I could tell everybody all of the wonderful, funny things that I embedded into my story, because it was written largely as a hoax. So I thought, I'm retired, they can't fire me. So I published an annotated space opera. After I thought that one was done, I realized there was a different novel in the book. The annotators are 5 figments of my personality. There's a pedant who knows everything. There's a cynic who doesn't believe a word he says. There's a Lovecraftian enthusiast who just gushes over the mere thought of tentacles and things of that sort. There's a science fiction expert who is beyond such crass details. And then there's the necessary neutral personality who says, okay guys, hold it down. This is the first book. This is the book with annotations. And the story did not increase that much. 450 footnotes, 5 appendices, 2 attempts at about the author. I started one and my characters said, wait a minute, you're telling lies here, let's do this again. And they proceeded to footnote my about the author section, which was really embarrassing. The point being, I thought it was done and realized it was not finished. That one is finished. That's why I'm selling the story, because I like the story. It's a good story. This is an entirely different novel, composed of humans and aliens interacting. When one of the aliens says, "What are you guys doing down there?" And when the annotator makes a mistake and lets it be known that he's been changing the text and hasn't told the rest of them. And they get very upset about this. It's a different novel. It's a novel about storytelling. It's a novel about what academics could be like, what it should be like in the free discussion of ideas and thoughts. And I enjoyed that so much that I now started my next one. It is going to be called, it is called, because I'm well into it, Moby Dick and Zombies and Vampires, an annotated novella. I may even use some of Herman's words. I'm not sure about that. But there's so much. I just got thinking about this zombie whale, and I couldn't resist the possibility. I'm introducing a new annotator. 2 of them are falling out because it's not Lovecraft. And the first footnote is going to be, well, here I am in that white space. There's nobody here. There are no words here. There's nothing for me to say. What am I supposed to do? And the next annotator shows up and says, hey, good to see you. It's been a while. And they're going to talk their way through Moby Dick in 35,000 words or less. So the point is, you're never finished. I would never have imagined writing this book 2 years ago. I've written all sorts of things. This was new. Now, at any point, if I suggest anything that triggers a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and I'll call on you and ask my wife to listen carefully and tell me what you said. I had a very kind friend ask about dinner this evening, and he had to repeat the word dinner 3 times with his face this close to mine before I figured out what the word was. I hope I'm not whistling, because I feel like I'm whistling at you. So at any time, if you have questions, please ask. What I'd like to do is field discussion about starting writing, getting ideas, about the process of writing, whether prose or poetry, about knowing what to do when you're finished, about editing from an editor's point of view. I know every writer who submits a novel manuscript knows that it's the best novel ever written. Believe me, the editors are not in on that secret in most cases, and in many cases the editor, not the acquisitions editor who buys the novel for the publisher, but the actual editor is the one who makes the book work, because the story's there but the words aren't. So if you have questions about how editing works, or if you've ever gotten books reviewed, what do you do with a good review? How important is that? What do you do with a bad review? How important is that? What's the etiquette of reviewing? So any questions at this point? Yes?
Question about the writing process. My main problem is I get stuck in the middle because I don't have the plot I need. So how do you flesh out a good lengthy plot?
You get stuck in the middle because you really don't have a clear path of where you're going. Is that a fair...
I have a problem with creating lengthy plots long enough to be a novel, and
sustaining a plot long enough to be a novel.
Yes.
Then
yes,
you write
yes.
a short story.
I don't want to write a short story.
There are two things, there are two approaches. Years ago, before most of you were even thought of, a married couple wrote some of the finest science fiction fantasy around. Lee Brackett and her husband, Edmond Hamilton. Lee Brackett, I'll start with Edmond Hamilton. Edmond Hamilton plotted every novel almost to the page and knew exactly what he was going to have his characters do. He would have shoeboxes full of 3x5 cards for each character: education, family, backgrounds, history, planet of origin, motivation, everything he would need to know about the character. He would take his boxes of characters and his full plot outline, set them on the table, and just start picking and typing. This was way pre-computer. And his novels were fantastic. Lee Brackett liked to start her novels. One of her characters was named Stark. Having found himself in an inextricable situation, Stark sat and thought, how can I get out of this? And she got him out of that only to find that the next problem was worse. And the next, she had no idea where she was going. She just knew that every time he resolved an issue, he was going to be confronted with another issue that was worse and that would require a broadening of scope until she became aware of the thrust of the story. Now, I'm not going to guarantee that she had no idea where it was going, but she didn't have plot outlines. She didn't have all of her characters listed. Her novels were fantastic and totally unlike Edmond Hamilton. So the answer is kind of twofold. I would urge you not to listen to someone who says you must outline your story and add stuff. That will make it novel length. And I would also be wary of anyone who says all you have to do is put him in a difficult situation and go for it. But somewhere in between you'll find a way of organizing plot that will serve you. And what you do if you don't have enough novel for a novel is literally you put your hero in greater and greater and greater peril, which may involve discovering the true hero of the novel, and it may involve discovering the true villains of the novel. My outlines tend to be 2 sentences or 3 sentences. My son outlines for his Children of the Empire, which is a goodly high fantasy. He had 12, the Sword Chronicles. He had 12 spiral notebook pages with scribbles. That was his outline. And from that, he generated, I think it was 120,000 words. I don't have an answer that I can give you. You can't take turning short stories into novel 1A and get the outline and the syllabus and go out and do it. But the primary point of storytelling is to get into the story so deeply that you find it difficult to get out. Some short stories are short stories, that's it. Some short stories really want to be and need to be novels because you're just beginning to talk about the edges of what's truly important to you and to your reader. Also, many novelists do begin writing short form and gradually move beyond it. C.S. Lewis, one of my favorites, wrote Renaissance-style poetry. Very backward-looking poetry. Decided that didn't sell and started writing short stories. Realized he had more to talk about, started writing novels. His close friend J.R.R. Tolkien was grading a collection of freshman comp essays shortly after the end of World War II, came across an empty blue book, flipped it over, and on the back wrote, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," and spent 60 years figuring out what that meant. Along the way, inventing 8 languages and all of the multiplicity of Middle-earth. How many are familiar with the Silmarillion? Okay, it's his creation epic. The text or the actions of Lord of the Rings are a paragraph in a footnote. The Silmarillion encompasses all the rest of the universe from beginning to end. All right, he started out with that single sentence, and then he said, "What's a hobbit? Why do they live in holes?" And began the process. He did not know where he was going. When World War II came along, he received a letter from his son Christopher, and in the letter he wrote that he was proceeding well with his story, that he had the hobbits at the mines of Moria, and they were kneeling around the grave of, I just forgot the dwarf's name, Dwalin. He says, "I don't know what's going to happen next." And he literally had no idea. And yet he managed to come up with something pretty good. So, imagination, thought, be willing to expand beyond your original image, your original idea, be willing to explore new possibilities within characters. If you run out of their strengths to play upon their weaknesses. And make it a good, long story rather than just a long story. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
At what stage do you feel comfortable sharing your drafts?
Never. I'm incredibly lucky. I have a built-in draft reader. Unfortunately, she's also the built-in draft reader for all 4 of our children, each of whom have written extensively. Now, seriously, because of my nature, because I am as introverted as I am, you have no idea how terrified I am at this moment talking to you guys. I don't like sharing for group discussion for 2 reasons. First, I taught poetry workshops for 10 years, 15 years in California, and the last 3 years couldn't hear what they were saying. So that lets out any kind of workshop group. And second, there's always one person in every workshop or one friend who says, "You did this wrong, you should do it this way." And in most cases, the friend is incorrect. Because that's not the novel you're writing, it's the novel the friend is writing. And my cardinal rule when I dealt with workshops or critique in my classes was to say, you are not allowed to say, "I like your novel," or "I don't like your novel." Not allowed. Well, I let them say I like it, that's okay. But they weren't allowed to say, "I don't like your novel." They had to say, I do not like this moment in your novel because, and pinpoint a question, a problem. Did you want your character to come off this way? Because he does. Oh no, I really didn't intend that. And then you go back and look again at your novel. As to your actual question, see, I told you I could talk about anything forever. As to your actual question, it should be finished unless you're sending materials to an editor who has requested specifically a chapter or 2 chapters. Again, there are several reasons for this. If you show a part of a manuscript to a friend and the friend comes back and says, oh, this is great, what happens next? And you tell them everything, why bother writing the novel? Your brain will say it's already been written and it will stop functioning. That happened to me many years ago. Never started again. So in a sense, you want to keep it a secret from everybody, including yourself, as long as possible. If an editor, a publisher has talked to you, you've pitched a novel, you say, I've got 5 chapters, and the editor says, send them to me, then of course, you go through it again and clean it up. And you go through it again and clean it up one more time. You send it to that person who has expressed interest in it. But as far as taking a full novel and giving it to someone to read, unless it's a close friend, someone who does it the right way, it often turns into a self-aggrandizement moment. Orson Scott Card says, I have one person read every novel, my wife. And when she finishes, I ask her one question. Where did you get bored? Because if my wife can't read it without getting bored, people who don't know me are not going to have a chance. And if she says, well, I started to fade around chapter 3, he goes back and rewrites chapter 3. So if you can find a writing partner, if you will, who is good, who understands story, and who is willing to say, I got bored with this character, I got bored with that because they did such and such, then it can be useful and helpful.
Sometimes the best writing partner is not another author. It's a reader.
Right.
Then you can say there's a problem here and not necessarily
No,
say,
fine.
and you should say.
If you're writing short form especially, this is harder to do with a novel, but if you're writing a short story, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best exercises you can engage in is set up, get in a room with a full-length mirror and put the story on a music stand so your hands are free. And then tell the story. And use gestures and let your voice go up and down. And then he crossed the bridge. And once he was across the bridge, he found, and if you can't do that, and he crossed the bridge, and on the other side of the bridge, then the story is not ready to go out because you're not interested in it. If you feel like an idiot standing there gesticulating and acting, that means the story is getting into you. And chances are better that it will get into your readers. Storytelling is largely oral for most people. And if you can catch those oral rhythms, then it helps. Like I say, a 500-page novel is a little harder to work with, but you can at least get sections that are crucial. And try reading them out loud. Try having someone else read them out loud and notice when they stumble. Because that sentence is not constructed properly. There weren't enough clues in punctuation and word choice to know how it was going to end. Yes, sir.
I've kind of heard a little bit of the opposite on that, where you're supposed to read it monotone, and that'll help you find where your faults are at.
He has heard that you should read it monotone, and that will help you hear where the faults are.
Everything I say is true for me. I developed this technique through my expository composition classes. where everything is normally read in a monotone anyway, and it doesn't sound any different. If you can't take an expository essay and put life into it, then it's a dead essay. It's passive. It's boring. With a story, I think the same thing holds true. But as with your question about length, if you find that reading in a monotone helps you pinpoint language and rhythm, then do it. I discovered something, many, many years ago when I first started writing form poetry. There is no poetry police. They will not break the door down and say, you missed a beat in your sonnet and carry you away. And there's no novel police either. There are reviewers who have never written a novel who will tell you what you should have done. And you listen to them and you think, is that true? And you answer, no, it's not true. And you don't do a thing to your novel, or you answer, that has got some merit to it, and you go back and look. So if you have people helping you by reading a certain way and it helps you, then use that. I'm always wary of any creative writer instructor who says, the way to write a poem, a story, a novel is as follows. False. One way to write a story is as follows. I don't know if you folks know or comprehend, and I don't mean to sound condescending here, but I don't know if you can fully comprehend the utter and absolute freedom of the world in which you're writing. The last 30 years have been the only time I am aware of, except for maybe 10 years in the 16th century, when there is absolutely no censorship. You can write, you can post, and nobody can tell you not to unless you post on Yahoo and then they take it down if you don't say the right things. We're getting out of that. We're starting to get cadres of people who attack other people for their ideas and their writings. But even so, we're still way beyond the day when if you wrote something against Queen Elizabeth I, they would cut your ears off. And if you wrote again, they would cut the stubs off. Unfortunately, one man was named Stubbs, and he had that happen to him twice. If you did it the third time, you were in prison for the rest of your life, which wouldn't be very long. So you are at a stage where you have accessibility literally to hundreds of people through the internet. You can write pretty much anything you want. A lot of people are going to come back and say, I really didn't like that. Fine. But people are also going to come back and say, I've been waiting for that story my whole life. It's a marvelous story. It's a wonderful story. And I have 3 friends who have 2 friends. And you begin to build a group around you. You won't make money this way, by the way. But you'll tell stories, and you'll convince people about the importance of storytelling. So anyone who says the only way to do something is this way isn't really alert to the possibilities that we have. Anything can be written. Some things should not be written. That's a matter of personal morality and personal integrity. And I firmly believe that there are novels out there that should never have been written. But I'm not one that's going to tell the author you can't write that way, or you can't talk about that. You'll find people who want to hear about it. So the answer is, okay, read in a monotone. That's fine with me. I'm not getting a royalty for every time you read through your rough draft. But do what works for you and what works for the audience you are listening to. If you're writing for children and young adults, I would argue you almost have to read it with expression and power, because that's the way they're going to want it to come through to them. If you're reading for adults and it's a more literary novel, then that sense of emotional involvement can be dampened down a little bit. Yes, ma'am?
With your process of keeping your story to yourself, how do you work through the bumps in the plot and figuring out how to get past those without talking to someone about it.
As you work through your plot, how do you work through, because you keep it to yourself, how do you work through when you find a bump or a problem with your plot without saying the plot?
Then is when your friends will be helpful. See, if you go to a workshop, this is my skewed vision of workshops. If you go to a workshop and everyone reads a chapter from their novel and everyone says, oh, that's so wonderful, except the one person who says, no, that's not going to work. You've learned nothing. You've gotten nothing from it, except you have a lot of good friends and one stinker. If, on the other hand, you know you have a problem, and we know when we have problems in our writing. We know when paragraphs just aren't working, when characters won't do what they have to do. Then you change your plot because characters are pretty stubborn. But I think we all know when we have a problem in our writing, and you say, here's a passage from my novel. It's not working for me because. Read the short passage. What suggestions might you make? And then I think you begin getting ideas. I'm not saying never go to a writer's group, but use them carefully, use them properly, and use them effectively. If all you want is, oh, that's wonderful, then just send copies of your novels to all your great aunts. You know, that'll resolve the issue. You'll feel good about yourself, and they'll think that you're the greatest thing ever created. If you want criticism, ask questions about specifics, and not, do you think my character should be blonde instead of brunette? Not that level, but motivation, action, heart, that sort of thing. And again, there's no single answer. It depends upon who you are and how you work. The way I do it, when I know I'm having problems with a particular passage, I think, who do I want to copy in this section of the novel? I've got Milton, I've got Melville, and I think back to the general outlines of stories that I've read and taught, and see how they resolve similar problems, and then say, okay, what can I do to my characters, not with them, but to them usually, that will allow me to work through this wall and get to the next part of the story. So even if you're not gregarious, outgoing, and open, you still have this enormous backlog of writers. Almost every book ever written is available to you. And again, you cannot understand what that means. In the 16th century, there were maybe 300 people who could read in London out of, get this, 100,000. So you really had very few people you could talk to, and all of the writers had their little enclaves that they would meet with, and then they would interact with other groups from other enclaves. We're not like that anymore. And I must tell you, I tend to just barrel through and depend upon my memory of writers and things that I've read that worked and things that I've read that didn't work. Most writers will tell you to read widely. Read, 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 read. And I would add to that, read widely and judiciously. When you finish a novel, ask yourself, did I like it? If I did, what can I steal from it? Not plot and character, but technique. Why did I like it? What did this writer do that grabbed me and pulled me in and kept me there? Did I like it? No, I really didn't. Why not? Too many characters, too complex. Well then, for heaven's sake, don't give a dramatis personae at the front of your novel listing all 48 people who are going to have walk-on roles somewhere along the way. Cut your characters down to a number that you enjoy. Stephen King is one of the most successful writers of our time. And he was asked many, many, many years ago, what accounts for your success? And he said, I started writing books that I wanted to read, but nobody had written. Write the book you want to read, get it finished, and then see if it meets other people's needs. I'm starting to sound repetitive, so I'll stop. Yes, sir.
How do you overcome writer's block?
How do you overcome writer's block? It was easy with a typewriter. You roll this beautiful, perfect, clean sheet of paper into the platen and look at it and go, X! And you just made it dirty. So it's not a clean sheet of paper anymore, it's already got stuff on it, and you just add more stuff. There are a number of ways of dealing with it. Dean Koontz, who is nothing if not prolific, before he became famous as Dean Koontz, had published 60 novels under 13 names and has continued at that speed. Once told me that after finishing a novel, he gives himself a day off. He worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when they were desperate. And after he finished the novel, he would take a day off. Then the next day, he would go driving through LA along the freeways and just kind of mindlessly follow the freeways. And when he came home, he would write down the 6 story ideas he thought of on that trip and decide which one he wanted to work on next and start that day. So one suggestion is don't ever stop writing. As soon as you finish something, begin again. Modern writing is helpful. Modern marketing is helpful because many publishers prefer to have series and sequels. So when you start your novel, you know that you have 3 novels to get through. By the time you get through that novel, give yourself a day off and just walk. I have another friend who just goes for a walk and looks around, pays attention, and comes back with ideas for the next novel. They may not work, but at least you're writing. So my answer to that is type something on the page. Type something on the screen. I've just finished this novel, I'm going to start another one. I think the most interesting for me to talk about right now might be and type something in. And then say, is that really interesting? No, why not? Because, and continue that line of thought. One of the great American poets, whose name I've forgotten again, don't get old, got up every morning at 6 and wrote prose until 9. He had a window in his garage, he would look out the window and just write, almost stream of consciousness for 3 hours. Go in, have breakfast, settle down, get ready for the day's work, go out, pick up those sheets of paper and say, there's a poem in here and I'm going to find it. Identify the poem and begin working on it. You can just do the same thing with short story. Set an alarm clock for 30 minutes and just write. I have nothing to say, so I'm going to say the same thing over and over again because that idiot at LTUE said that I should sit at my desk for 30 minutes and write. And your brain gets tired of trivia and drivel. And pretty soon you're going to start talking about important things. Then give yourself a 15-minute break, go back and look at it. And there's a story in there somewhere. I used to have my freshmen do this once a week. I would give them the topic for the essay due in 2 weeks. I'd give it to them on Monday. On Friday they would walk in and I'd say, okay, you've got 50 minutes, write the essay. Don't stop. Don't lift your pen from the paper. This was in the olden days when they actually had pen and paper. Just shortly after the goose quills went out of style. Don't lift your pen and look in the sky and expect a story. Keep writing. Trivia. Whatever you write. Because you'll have your paper. Then over the next week, revise it. Get rid of all the junk. Take portions that are interesting but are not fully developed and expand upon them meaningfully. And by the end of the semester, I had students who at the beginning could barely write 100 words, writing 500, 600, 700 rough drafts of essays a week before the essay was due. And then all I had to do was get rid of everything that didn't work. And we would spend time that next week talking about that as well. Helpful? Okay. Other questions? We have about 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
I was just wondering of all the time you've been a writer, if you could have gone back from when you very first started writing, like, what would you have told yourself?
If you, after all this time and all the things that you've written, if you could go back and talk to yourself when you first began, what would you tell yourself?
Well, I would have so many things to tell myself. One is, don't wait 10 years to get hearing aids. The other is, don't convince yourself that you're only good at one thing. By the time I finished undergraduate work in college, I had decided if I write anything, by the time I finished high school, I had decided if I write anything, it's going to be scholarship, because I really am not very inventive. And in undergraduate work, I began writing essays, and I thought, this is what I want to do. Take a story, look at what makes it tick, put it back together, and then tell other people, this story is good because, and you're going to enjoy it because, and make them go back to that story and say, I can read this from a new perspective now, and find new things. And I thought that was it. That's all I'm going to do. I'll be a professor. I knew I wanted to be a professor since 5th grade. I didn't know what professors did, but I was going to be one. And I knew I was going to teach Milton from junior year in high school, which tells you a great deal about me that I probably shouldn't have explained. After I finished undergraduate work, I took 2 years and went on a mission to Germany. While I was there, I was 2 years older than almost everyone, and I was already very much introverted and closed off. I feel most uncomfortable trying to make small talk. I can't do it, especially because it usually involves 5 or 6 people, and once there's more than 2 people looking at me, I can't follow it. I had a missionary companion with whom I could not speak. He was from the Midwest, and he spoke the Midwest version of Valley Talk. Like, dude, wait. And I just bristled. And his German was atrocious. And he never tried to correct it. I'm making it much worse than it was. But I couldn't talk to him, so I just shut up. Till we were on a door, and then I'd do my part and shut up. And one night, around 11 o'clock, he was calling his girlfriend back home from Germany, which lets you know something about mission rules and how he respected them. And I was in bed, and I had the rhythm going through my mind. And I just started writing in my mission journal. And it ended up, because I'm nothing if not academic, a heroic verse on missionary work written in Anglo-Saxon alliterative 4-stressed meter. You all do that for fun and profit. And over the course of time, I filled my missionary journal with poems. And I came home and I thought, I'm going to be a poet. And in my spare time, I'll write critical articles. And then a couple years into graduate school, I thought, if I were to write a novel, who could I write about? And I thought, all I know about is being a graduate student. And so I wrote about a world in which words create realities. I had the beginning scene and the end scene. And I figured it'd take me 50,000 words to get from one to the other. 200,000 words later, my characters finally agreed to do what I wanted them to do in the first place. And I realized I can tell stories. So my biggest advice to myself would be, don't pigeonhole yourself into little boxes and say that's all I can do. Try new things. Explore possibilities. Blend forms. Hey, you've got a story you like, but it's got a lot of jokes in it that people won't get. Tell them where the jokes are. and create essentially a Mystery Science Theater 3000 out of your book, which I would never have conceived of 5-10 years ago. So don't lock yourself behind walls that don't exist. There are audiences out there. There are people willing to respond to you. The social media allows for saying, I have a close friend from childhood or college whose grandson contacted me not too long ago and said, would you read this for me? And I read the first chapter of a fantasy novel. I sent a couple of suggestions. And he said, well, this is one of 26 that I have posted so far in my writing group. The kid's 15. He's got a writing group that posts online, read each other's works, comment on them, then go back to their own works and explore further. And except for the fact that he had apostrophes in his names everywhere, making them totally unpronounceable, he had done a remarkably good job on this fantasy novel. None of my characters have names longer than one syllable. It's a different universe. You can do whatever you want. So that's my advice. Trust yourself. I didn't trust myself for the first 40 years. And then found out that I was bipolar and going deaf. And if I had started earlier, I might be a very different person than I am today with my writing and just being around people. Any other questions? I've answered everything. Well, I thank you so much for being willing to put up with my experiment and giving me a chance to talk about one of the things I love most. Not the most, but one of the things I do love, and that is anything to do with writing. I thank you very much.